chance to answer. Every single question that we don't answer live here, you'll get an email with the answer to the question, so don't be too concerned if we didn't get yours. Okay, this one, I've got two that are similar, it looks like. Jim, I guess that's Jim Brackens. All right, do you expect to see a negative impact on the number of professionals in the peer review program as a result of the new requirements? What efforts are being made to recruit new peer reviewers? Are these done at the national or state level? And this one is similar. Address where new peer reviewers will come from if new standards push out a lot of mature reviewers.
Mature reviewers, that's a polite way to put it.
Those of us that are old.
That's not what they wrote.
Rather than directly answer the question, let me tell you, give a couple comments on that. We have had initiatives for a number of years in terms of recruiting team captains. I want to make the distinction between team members and team captains. And right now, we have more team captain qualified individuals out there than we've ever had before. The challenge we've had up till now has been that the ones that we have recruited to be team captains and have gone through the training have not been engaged to do peer reviews because the firms continue to use their existing team captain. I'm not going to say that's good or bad, it's just the way it is. So to answer the question about team captains, no, we are not concerned about that. We believe that we have an adequate pool of team captains. Now, when it comes to team members, the subject matter expert, remember my comment that I said that part of our challenge is we have, and I believe, it's a personal belief, that we have a lot of team captains that are perhaps stretching their ability or really not recognize the limitation in their ability in looking at engagements. Yes, we believe that is a challenge. We do believe it is a challenge in terms of having enough subject matter experts to serve as team members. Alan alluded to it a minute ago when he mentioned an initiative we had to the major firms group. We've actually had two different initiatives. One is geared at what we call the major firm groups. Those are the largest firms below the big four. I forgot the number of firms that is, that we've had a special appeal to, and we've also had an appeal to, we went back, we looked at the firms that, both for employee benefit plans and for governmental, those that perform 100 or more, firms that perform a high volume, they're specialized in them, look to see whether they were members of the respective quality center, that they had the commitment to quality, and did a little more investigation to see if they had any issues in peer review or ethics. And so we in essence, we wanted to do some due diligence in terms of the quality of firms. But all of these firms received two different communications, one from our CEO, Barry Melanson, and it was an appeal to the firms to recognize that we have an audit quality issue. Recognize we have it, and we owe it, you owe it to these firms to give back to the profession, and asking for a commitment of a minimum of 40 hours per firm of their subject matter experts. Doesn't mean partners. It could be very strong managers that are technically strong. And we've had very good response. Where is Carl? What did you say we've had so far? Where is Carl in here? What's the number we've received so far? Yeah, about 70 responses so far saying absolutely will help. Now, what we're asking for is not just team members. We're actually asking them to be willing to be part of our oversighters. We've talked about the enhanced oversight, and also be willing, frankly, to be available to firms that may need consulting in the area or EQCR, engagement quality control review. So it's an appeal for a number of things, but part of it is for being team members. So that is our first crack at this initiative of going after team members. But yes, we do believe there will be a difficulty in that area. We're taking steps to obtain as many subject matter experts as we can. But if there is a challenge, that's going to be the area, and that's the area we're working on.
All right. Next question is addressed to Janice. What states are considered to have the best, or considered the best for PROCs? And this one is, how many states have PROCs, and how is NASBA going to help the states to get a PROC? By the way, I learned a lot from this session. Constance, put that on your evaluation.
Well, it's very difficult to say which state has the best PROC.
I thought you were going to say Oklahoma.
I'm going to get there. But then if I say Oklahoma, I have to say Texas because we plagiarized. Mississippi had a very active PROC when we started. I would say you have to look at your you know, if you have no rules or you had no statute, you were starting with a blank page, I would think Oklahoma, Mississippi, Texas, I think Louisiana has a good program. State of Washington has done some good things. There are several states you can look at to mirror, but to say it's the best practice, I don't know that I could actually say that, because you all have to, as your boards look at it, it has to be designed. California has an incredibly active PROC. They have really, their guidebook is quite a few pages. However, every state doesn't have the resources that some of those states I've mentioned do. As far as, there are approximately 20 states at the last time we checked that had some form of a PROC or PROC or quality QROC, or how is it you
You're not
say
gonna say
it?
it wrong.
Rock and roll.
Yeah. But there are several of those that are not really active. So they're not, I wouldn't say they have something called a PROC, but they are really not functioning. So hopefully that those of you that are here today will be able to take some information back. We have 30 states represented in this conference. There were approximately 90 attendees. So hopefully you will be able to go back to your state, take some of the information you've learned, talk to the states that are not here and tell them, you know, what you learned, and hopefully we are going to make a push to try to help with that from NASBA. I'm not certain exactly what help we'll be able to do. We've looked at some things. But at this point, it's in the very early stages of what we might be able to do. And so, you know, Ken Bishop always says, don't say anything or promise anything unless you can write the check. And so at this point, I can't write a check. So I'm going to just kind of hold it down until we see what we're able to do. But we are working on some things.
Also, keep in mind, for those of you who are just developing PROCs, I'm assuming that, Jim, you addressed this in your session earlier today, but on the NASBA website, there are sample forms, sample reports. That's one of the reasons why we want PROC reports that you're making to your boards. Send a copy to NASBA so we can, you know, help other states have them, you know, so they know what a proper report looks like, what they should be reporting to their board. All right, Alan. Does a 40% error rate at the DOL engagements suggest a 40% error rate on other industry audits as well?
Well, we can't correlate that for sure because we haven't really done the oversight with regard to those. One thing I will say about the DOL error rate is the alarming part was that when you got back into the devil of the details is there was a lot that was not necessarily DOL specific compliance issues. It was things along the line of clarity standards, risk assessments, documentation with regard to planning. There was a lot of those type of things. So, but to say that that correlates to 40 to 40, I can't say that for sure because of that study has not been done. Right.
But we do know that some of the errors that were found were not ERISA or EBP specific.
They were not Muscle Lake specific. I'll just say that. Right.
Yeah, that's the wrong answer, but thanks. All right.
It's the answer.
It's the answer.
Actually, you know what I would want to add, just more to even the auditors in the room, I would say probably the biggest error or area we find problems in and continue to have the debate, and Carl would say this, we had a discussion last night about this, is documentation. There is just an unbelievable disbelief on the part of practitioners of you have to be able to follow the work.
I'm a quality control partner, my friend.
Yeah.
Tell me something I don't know. SAS 103, very simple. If it ain't written, it didn't happen. Okay, Jim Giroux. This one is from an AICPA senior technical manager. Her question is,
We know who that's
generally,
There's only one in the room.
I know that. I didn't say a name.
No names, no.
Didn't have
Names. Generally, what information should a PROC share with the board? By the way, this one is not going to be put in the prize. No, it will.
This will be included twice then. What should I share with the board? Well, I can speak from what I share with the board is I make sure that the oversight reports from the AICPA and my state society are included in those types of things, where it's indicating the statistics and the results and the process and those types of things. So pretty much you can inform the board of everything. The caveat is that you shouldn't do is give detail specific items, because those might be going to an enforcement situation and you just don't want that in the public domain, and those might be under investigation. So you gotta hold back on naming firms but you can give, like, you know, X% as a fail rate, or pass with deficiencies would be Y%, and here's the growing trends and those types of things in the state operations.
And keep in mind, that report is supposed to tell the state board how the system is functioning. It's back to the system review as opposed to an engagement review. Okay, Janice, this one, as boards often have many committees that are made up of volunteers, for those states that do pay PROC members, how do you justify one group of volunteers getting paid over another group? And they specifically said Oklahoma. And I'm assuming it's from a board member, from somebody who's from a state where they don't.
Probably came from Virginia.
It did.
Yeah.
It's really easy to answer. We have no other volunteer committees on the Oklahoma board. All committees at the Oklahoma board are made up of Oklahoma board members who are not paid even a per diem. So when you agree to serve, you agree to serve without pay. But when we looked at it, I will just tell you the logic. We did toss around asking for volunteers because individuals volunteer to be on RABs for the society. Individuals volunteer in other capacities. We felt like we were asking a professional to do a professional job. And so therefore, we spent a lot of time discussing this, and that's the reason we determined that we would pay those individuals. And I know some states have told me in the past they've had trouble getting individuals to serve on the PROCs because it was a volunteer position. So it is an issue, but that's the reason we elected to pay. And so since we don't have other volunteer committees, we don't have to deal with this issue. But it could be an issue. So.
All right, Jim, I know the answer to this one. Has the AICPA putting together an annual webcast for RAB members to make sure that they are aware of changes in what the RAB should be looking at? For example, the required assessment of a second consecutive non-pass.
Actually, this one's interesting because it didn't come from someone that was at the meeting yesterday, the joint meeting that the Oversight Task Force and the Compliance Assurance Committee had. But it was actually brought up, and we discussed and realized it would be a very good idea. We do have a peer review conference. There's a session at the peer review conference that's for committee chairs and committee members where this information would be discussed. But the fact of the matter is, not everybody comes to the conference. And we agreed that this is really a good idea, and it is a to-do item that we will be doing, is putting together a webcast, some sort of training that will be rolled out. And frankly, it's not going to be just for RAB members. We're going to encourage PROCs members to attend as well and listen, because we think it'd be valuable to both.
And that'll be hopefully on an annual basis to cover new material.
I think it's a great idea.
And Jim, there will be no charge for that, is that correct?
Only for Oklahoma, since you pay people.
Only for Oklahoma.
No, it would be free.
Question?
Okay, Jim Giroux, what proactive steps outside of enforcement have state societies and/or boards taken to address audit quality and peer reviewer problems?
Yes.
Next.
That's not a maybe?
No, that's actually, that's a big issue right now, and it's a constant discussion. I think at my board meetings for the last 4 or 5 of them, that's just been a discussion, and it's really a work in process. And we're going to be turning to committees like the CAC and NASBA and those areas to find out, you know, how are other states and other organizations handling this type of thing, because I know we're not in a vacuum and we all have to work together to come up with a real good solution. So hopefully that's the best answer I could give at this point. So we're working on it.
Okay. Alan, can a PROC require firms to send in copies of AICP letters, i.e. consecutive fail-pass deficiencies?
A lot of that would depend upon that state statutes and what their PROC has the authority for, or it may be a board authority more so than it is actually the PROC authority at that point in time. But it would depend on the state statutes. I know in Kentucky, they can require the firm to send anything that they have received with regard to their report, their letters, anything else, even over and above what's on FSBA.
The PROC can request,
We don't have
or
a
the
PROC,
board?
just the board.
Board.
Just the board, because we
And
do
then,
not
of
have a
course,
PROC in
A
Kentucky.
lot of that information is on FSBA.
Right. A lot of that information is already there, but it just depends on the state statutes, because I know there's some states that they can't even request directly from the firm their peer review report, much less anything else. So a lot of that would depend upon what the state statutes had with regard to where it's a PROC and or the board.
Okay, Alan, another one for you. How will the AICPA communicate to the boards about terminated firms, letter or website? Is it something the board staff will have to monitor?
It's my understanding that they're going to be sending those terminations directly to the board through a letter, possibly, I don't know, email. Jim, you might know a little bit more about that.
Whether it's a letter versus email, I will tell you that, I'll put a plug in here for Leona, actually, that right now NASBA is trying to compile information as to who these communications should go to, whether it's the board executive director, whether it's enforcement committee. She's compiling this, so I'll put a plug as if you haven't heard this, let Leona know this. Once they get that, they're also going to be sharing that with us at the Institute so we know who to communicate with, because it's very critical that we get that information.
And that was something we discussed in the joint meeting yesterday very heavily is, if it was Mary Smith that's the person that's supposed to get that at that board, but the board needs to be looking at having some way to make sure that that person is still there, because when that email bounces back or whatever, it disappears, and maybe they didn't get the communication. So, the boards and that's part of what Leona is going to be doing, is to try and get a good list together with that. And, one suggestion I would have for the boards, just since we're sitting here, is maybe you have just a email that somebody has to monitor that's like a permanent type of email address, but so it could just get routed to whoever that you have. I know we use those in our firm, for admin stuff and that kind of stuff, so that happens, and that way that email never gets shut off, and it's going to go to somebody at all times.
Now, that response, by the way, sort of, talks to what I was discussing a little bit earlier today when I made put in my own little 2 cents. We've got the AICPA, a professional organization made up of members. We've got NASBA, an organization representing state boards of accountancy, cooperating on a project because it's in the best interest of the profession, to both of them.
And
you've
the
got
protection of the public.
and the protection of the public. You also have Alan, who is a NASBA member, serving currently on the peer review board as the regulatory representative. Alan followed me. I was on the peer review board for 3 years as the regulatory representative, and I followed Janice. So the cooperation between the organizations is really very close because we're all on the same side. Okay, Janice. Recommend and further practice recurrent and future practice monitoring. What is done on peer review internationally is the U.S. alone in problematic audits and peer review.
Jim,
You got that one.
I'll ask you to chime in if you'd like to. I only really know a little bit about Canada. Canada comes to our annual meeting every year. The lady who is one of the reviewers for one of the provinces always brings me little tidbits on what's going on in Canada. But it is a program run by the government. It is not run by a professional organization. And they are very much operate like the PCAOB. They are doing individual engagement inspections. So beyond that, Jim, I'm going to throw it to you and let you.
I will tell you there is at the international level, there is the same concept that there should be practice monitoring, but it is very broad, recognizing it could be done, by a governmental entity, it could be done by the professional organization. And also bear in mind, I think everywhere except the United States, it's the professional organization that controls the license as well. So it's, it's a whole mixed bag where we're unique in that regard. But no, it varies from country to country. I will tell you that the AICPA helped develop Saudi Arabia's program. I was over there last year, I guess, to do some training. I've been invited to go to, and this is going to be thrilling, Beirut, Lebanon, in October to do some training there. So they're developing their program now. Yeah, that one's my wife's not too thrilled about that one, but it does vary. But it is, I will tell you that what is generally recognized is our program and the one that's done by the CAs of I can't remember the exact title of Scotland and Wales. I forget, ICAEW. They're generally considered the two strongest programs out there.
And I will tell you that talking to the girl from Canada, they have similar problems. I mean, but they do have a strong stick, and a firm doesn't want to get in trouble there because they're going to lose their license. So.
Okay, Jim Brackens, regarding engagement listing completeness, if an engagement is left off the listing, will there be any gray area, or is it assumed it was intentional? And the follow-up is, will peer reviewer be consulted by the hearing panel?
Again, it hasn't come up yet. I went over what the guidance is right now, so it'll be interesting to see what occurs. I mean, the message we have been given, and I am hoping that firms are getting it, is that the presumption will be, frankly, that it was intentional. Now, in terms of, I don't know what you say, gray area, I would say I'm sure they will come up with situations that there will be a legitimate reason that a firm left it out and will be able to convince the hearing panel. But the peer review board came down very strong on this one to make it clear that the firm gets it right. Now, in terms of whether the peer reviewer would be called, wouldn't be a standard process for the peer reviewer to be consulted by the hearing panel. I mean, it could happen, and depending on the facts and circumstances, whether it's warranted. It's not prohibited, but it's not, I can't address whether that would occur every time.
That was actually a question that I had a personal concern with. My firm had our last peer review. I had just been named quality control director, and the peer reviewer asked me to sign the representation letter. Is everything listed? And I'm looking at it, and it says, if it's not, there's a good chance you're going to be brought up before the AICPA Ethics Committee. And I'm saying, I've got to sign this. I knew I had a system in place. We have a system that requires a form to be filled out for every engagement. Those forms get routed by the administrator, who makes copies and binds the reports, and that gets entered, so it's independent of the partner. It gets entered into our database. But people are human, and we make mistakes. So we had a system. I had tested the system. I believed in the system. So I was pretty comfortable. If something was left out, I had a system, and I knew that it was pretty good. So, I felt better signing it, but it's still it's a question.
It's a tough question.
One thing I wanted to say about that, Jim, a little bit with the discussions we had at the board level, there was a lot of confusion, I think, on this as an engagement being left out. If a firm's doing 45 EBP engagements and one got left off the list, we're never going to know that. I mean, no one is probably ever going to know that. So, because the EBP practice still got looked at.
Right.
The problem with what this was to address is they did 5 EDPs. I mean, we actually have seen this happen. They had 5 EBPs and none of them were put on the list. Or they had a couple of yellow books and none of those were put on the list. So wasn't ever intended in my mind based on the discussions we had at the board level, that, if you left off one out of your 45 EBPs, that you're going to have a problem.
Yeah, and to be more technical about that, it's, if you actually look at this is dealing with what we would have if we would have a mandatory, where at the AICPA level, we would be dictating a recall of the acceptance letter, and that means when the peer review report is materially misstated on its face. And what Alan just described, if a firm had said that it was doing 25 EBP engagements, they left one off the list, the report is still going to indicate that the EBP practice was looked at, and so leaving one off is not going to make the report materially misstating on its face. So it would never get to that point. As Alan said, it's really designed for those firms, but it could be the one.
It could be the one,
The
right?
firm did one, and they didn't leave it on there. That's what we're after. You better be sure that you understand what you're doing in practice. You better not have a renegade tax partner out there that thinks it's a part of it doing the 5,500. You really need to make sure the entire practice understands what this is. I mean, because we got some of those too.
And
That's
that
what
was
it's.
actually, somebody actually said that, didn't they?
We hit some of those, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, Jim Giroux, can board staff be a PROC member? County board staff?
Only if you're a renegade tax partner. No. That answer, it better be yes, and it is yes, because in fact in Ohio, we do have a staff person who attends and does the oversight for the RABs and reports back. And they're isolated, and they're isolated from the board. And we make sure that they don't get involved in a lot of the things that can expose them in an investigation. In addition to that, the way it works is they never get to keep any of the data. They show up that day, and a computer is provided for them with all the material handouts, and they basically observe during the day and report back to the committee. That's it.
Okay, Janice, okay, how are other PROCs handling the ethical dilemma of practitioners withholding engagements from their reviews, ERISA, et cetera?
If we're talking about the DOL debacle, for lack of a better word, it's kind of been across the board. Dan, would you mind to come to the microphone and kind of talk about the stats that you gave at the conference? Dan works with the state boards, and he has seen the variety of some of the fines. So if you don't mind, answer.
Sure.
Sorry, I should have prepared you.
It really depends on the jurisdiction's statutes and what it does with respect to discipline. Some have done minor and technical administrative actions. Others have done things such as fines and penalties against firms. I think the other thing that's important, some jurisdictions only look at audits where the sponsoring organization is based in their state, and then there are other jurisdictions that will look at where the audit is performed. So it really varies state to state across the country.
Don't know if that answered the question, but there's really not a specified way.
Okay, another one, Jim Brackens. We had someone from Hawaii here?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's great.
All right. With the new real-time monitoring, is there an issue with the AICPA becoming part of a firm's quality control system, yet continuing to oversee the peer review process? That's an interesting question.
Well, and actually, that's why we call it a purposely provocative paper. It was, I will tell you, that's one of the great unanswered questions. I mean, that was one of the things that the steering task force said that would have to be looked at is, okay, is clearly this process is going to be, whether it's AICPA or it's the external monitor, the higher the different stages, that they would become a part of the firm's monitoring system. So the question is in that regard, is independence still important in a practice monitoring environment? I mean, that's really part of the questions that are out there to be answered. So I can't answer that because it's been recognized, and that's part of the ongoing discussion. That's why it's provocative.
And Jim, I believe that was one of the points that NASBA's letter also brought out. We asked that question, at what point might that you know, might you have stepped over the line? So it's a very good question.
All right, Janice, there are varying levels of involvement by states, from no proc to an inactive proc to an active proc, some more active than others. Does that cause concern in the profession with respect to oversight? The flexibility is nice, but is there a way or a need to align our efforts? Training, question mark. Everyone here seems to have a different level of knowledge. Interesting question.
Very good question, and I will reiterate for maybe at least the second or third time today, you're all from different states. You have different boards. Those boards have different opinions. I mean, that, when we have our regional meetings and we are in our regions, Southwest region is made up of 5 states, Arkansas, Louisiana, Texas, New Mexico, and Oklahoma. That's probably, I think, the smallest region number of states, and I can assure you that when we have an issue, there's 3 and 2 or 4 and 1. It is rare for us to have 5 and 0 on any issue, because those board members feel differently about different issues. So you're right, there are differences. I think the important thing to carry is that you have a peer review oversight committee that is at least doing the things that we have in the training videos. Those training videos are very good. If you're just starting, that's a great place to start. If you will follow those, I believe if your board can, if your statutes allow, you will be in a good position. But it's just like CPE. If you go look at all the statutes, they're different. We're not exactly alike, but we're very similar. And I think once we are going to really be encouraging, and I say we, the Compliance Assurance Committee along with NASBA, to really encourage every state to have an active proc in some form. Is that?
Okay. This next question, I'm not sure if it's to Alan or Jim. We'll start with Alan. If a firm is kicked out of the peer review program by a hearing panel, is there an avenue for them to come back, or is it permanent?
I'll start. Jim may need to kick in here. We really need Gary for this stuff. He's
fishing in Alaska.
Right. But if it's coming from a hearing panel, one thing I do want to say is they usually can appeal to the Joint Trial Board at that point. Also, because I've actually chaired the last two hearing panels, and that was part of what I read them, is they had 30 days to appeal to the Joint Trial Board with regard to our decision, because they were kicked out of the program, for lack of better terminology. So, but if they don't appeal to the Joint Trial Board, yes, they can reapply. It's my understanding.
By the way, the reason I kind of cringe is that's true if they're AICPA members.
Well, exactly. Okay.
If they're not AICPA members, the process
it's
will
over.
be different.
Right.
Well, depends on what the administering entities put, the state societies put in
Right.
place. So.
Okay. If you want to go a little further with that, Jim, you can, but that's...
No, that was just the reason I
Okay,
cringed,
right,
that's all.
well, and I know we're looking at some other things on that too, so.
Yep. But I think the question is about, is it permanent? And the answer is it's not necessarily permanent. The firm can reapply, but they're gonna go back before another hearing panel, and they're gonna have to really demonstrate that they've taken steps to where it's not gonna occur again, you know.
What have they done to fix the system?
Yeah.
Okay. This question, I guess I should preface it by saying this was written by a board staff person. How do I convince my boss to join a proc? Or I'm assuming what you really meant was to create a proc on that board. Jim, why don't you take that one?
Well, my suggestion would be maybe find a nice restaurant, take them out to dinner, maybe a nice bottle of wine, and to do that. No, but seriously, I would try to sit them down and pull up some of the proc videotapes and the things that are available online and show them what's going on, and if it's reaching out to getting a member of the CAC involved, or NASBA staff involved, that's how you got to do it. I think you really should give me a call. I'll take them to dinner and give them a bottle of wine or something like that.
And Dan Dustin, I know, working with the boards on issues, will be happy. I mean, I know he's going to be a part of our process that we're working on. He's working on one now. So call him, and I'm sure he would be glad to discuss it. Call me. I'm glad to discuss it. We'll help in any way we can. Obviously, we can only tell them why it's an important thing and offer suggestions, but we're happy to help any way we can.
Okay. Jim Brackens, the confidentiality issues have become a sticking point between the society and the PROC. Where can we find this language between the AICPA and the society?
Well, the simple answer is the confidentiality language is found in the peer review standards. But this is, we've talked about FSBA. I mean, this is where, we're encouraging, states. I understand there's challenges in different states, but why we encourage facilitated state board access. We encourage mandatory facilitated stated board access, because that's, that is where you're going to be able to get the, the level of being the reporting that's allowed under our standards, with the firm's permission. Beyond that, in terms of confidentiality, that is why I made the comment earlier about I really believe it's important for PROCs not only to exist, but to observe the RAB process, to be able to observe everything, because that becomes the function of the RAB. There is no, when you have that letter, the confidentiality letter signed, and they're able to come in, there is no confidentiality restriction anymore. I mean, those PROC members are going to be able to, look at everything there is. They can go to the state society, look at all the files that are needed. They have complete access. It's complete transparency, and then they can report back to the board. Now, as was mentioned, what Jim had said, you can't go back with identifying information about a firm, but you can report, that the process is working. You can report the concerns you have. And frankly, if you have concerns, we want to know about them at the AICPA as well. We would be concerned. But that's where the information comes. So I went beyond, I think, what...
Could the question have been more about, when they talk about confidentiality, between what a PROC member sees at a RAB and what their responsibility might be to the board as far as, this firm or that firm, where there were so many fails, and they may feel uncomfortable saying, I know there's a firm out there that got 2 fails in a row. How does,
well,
again, there's a dilemma there.
Again, well, it's a dilemma, but bear in mind, that's where there's an interchange there. I mean, if you have the facilitated state board access, you're going to be able to see the 2 fails. And by the way, it hasn't been mentioned, one of the things that we were asked is to be able to have comparative information. It was just the most recent peer review. It is now the 2 most recent. So you can go back and look and see if there's two fails in a row. I mean, that's not really a challenge. Now, I will say, and where potentially you get into the issues, but again, this is the whole point about the firm specific, is that is where you do have that absolute restriction, that you couldn't say X firm, say had a non-conforming engagement in this area. Now, you can say that I don't believe that the RABs are taking appropriate action with respect to non-conforming engagements and impacting the report, and report that to the board that we have concern about how it's operating. That they could do.
Okay. All right. Peer review was designed as a CPA self-regulation. Does the current movement of peer review from education to enforcement and regulatory use mean self-regulation has failed? Why don't you take that one?
You're giving me an easy one at the end. Okay, I like that. No. No, actually, I'm going to answer this 2 ways. Does it mean it has failed? It will have failed if we don't take the steps we need to protect self-regulation. I'm trying to remember who was it Frank that was our speaker that actually was talking about where our concern is and why we absolutely believe this needs to remain in the hands of the profession, including the state boards. When I say that, is the last thing we want is to have a law passed that says, okay, the Department of Labor now is responsible, for regulating the profession in this area. You've got GAO is now going to regulate the profession in this area. And all of a sudden we have you know, that becomes very fixed in terms of what they're looking at. You have a lot of different other individuals that are regulating the firms. It's taking away taking away some of the authority of state boards, frankly, when you do that, and it becomes fixed. As the environment, what you're actually seeing is self-regulation working, although it's painful right now, because the environment has changed. The environment has changed since it was 30 years ago when this was started out as an educational program, and we actually differ on the definition of education, Henry, because I say it is remedial now. It was educational remedial, now it is remedial. I honestly say, yeah, there's an education component, but peer review's value right now is remedial. Well, the next step is, if we go to, say, a purely regulatory area at a national level, is it going to be remedial anymore, or is it going to be purely punitive? Is that, you know, so,
I
you know,
I was not using educational, I was comparing educational to punitive.
Right.
Remedial,
And
to me, is part of the
is-
education process.
Right, and we would agree. So I actually would say that it's not that it's failed. I think it's an example that, although maybe we're going through a painful process now, that it's working because we are changing. We are reacting to what needs to be done.
Okay. And final question to you, Jim. Will the AICPA, this is an easy one, will the AICPA be spending any dollars on educating the public about how to select a CPA firm? That the lowest price may not be the best price. The lowest fee may not be the best price. Audit quality matters.
I'll have to answer that two ways. I mean, we absolutely would not be making the message about fees. I mean, we are just talking about federal regulators. The Federal Trade Commission would be all over us if we did. There are a number of initiatives that are out there. I would say, let's take the DOL right now as an example. We have a very concerted effort right now to educate the procurers of the service of an audit, to get them to understand what their responsibilities are as the plan sponsor. We have a number of tools that are out there for the plan sponsors for evaluating an auditor, of which, of course, peer review is a part. So in other words, we are spending funds, and we are going after, you know, right now it's predominantly EBP. We'll be doing the same thing in the governmental area of making it clear that, look, you have a responsibility when you're hiring an auditor to hire a qualified auditor. We don't get into price, we get into, are they qualified?
All right. I see that Tom Kenny is back in the room. He's got a bunch of prettily wrapped packages that are way too big to put into luggage. You want to have any final comments, Jim, Janice?
I just want to thank everybody for coming. I think we've had a really great day. I was excited about it from the beginning. I think it's been really great. Do you have all the evaluations in?